The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal spires of the Draconic Academy of Stellar Sciences, where the most elite minds from across the galaxy gathered to unlock the mysteries of the universe. Among the towering dragon students with their gleaming scales and ancient wisdom, Marcus Chen felt impossibly small as he clutched his acceptance letter with trembling fingers. The human exchange program had been controversial from the start. Dragons had ruled the academic world for millennia, their natural affinity for complex mathematics and theoretical physics, making them the undisputed masters of scientific advancement. When the Galactic Education Council proposed allowing a single human student to attend their most prestigious institution, the debate raged for months. Humans were seen as short-lived, impulsive creatures whose brains simply couldn't compete with the sophisticated neural networks of dragonkind. Marcus stood at the academy gates watching as massive bronze and silver dragons soared overhead, their wings creating gusts that nearly knocked him off his feet. His heart pounded as he approached the registration desk, where a magnificent emerald dragon named Professor Zithara looked down at him with barely concealed disdain. Her eyes, each larger than Marcus's head, glowed with an inner fire that spoke of centuries of accumulated knowledge. "So you are the human," she said, her voice resonating like distant thunder. "I must admit, I am curious to see how long you will last before realizing the futility of your presence here. Our coursework is designed for minds that can process information across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Your species has barely mastered three-dimensional thinking." Marcus swallowed hard, but maintained eye contact. "I understand the challenges, Professor, but I didn't come here to give up easily. My species may think differently, but that doesn't mean we can't learn." A low rumble of amusement escaped the dragon's throat. "Brave words for such a small creature. Very well, human Marcus Chen. Your dormitory assignment is Tower 7, Level 3. Try not to get lost. The Academy's layout shifts based on quantum probability matrices that update every 6 hours." As Marcus made his way through the corridors, he couldn't help but feel the weight of hundreds of draconic eyes upon him. Students whispered in their ancient language, their words creating small puffs of smoke that smelled of sulfur and starlight. The architecture itself seemed designed to humble him, ceilings that stretched impossibly high, doorways that required him to crane his neck just to see the top, and floating platforms that responded to thoughts he couldn't quite formulate. His first class was Advanced Quantum Mechanics with Professor Korath, an ancient gold dragon, whose scales shimmered with mathematical equations that constantly shifted and evolved. As Marcus entered the vast lecture hall, the professor's massive head turned toward him with interest. The other students, all dragons of various colors and sizes, fell silent. "Ah, our exotic specimen has arrived," Professor Korath announced, his voice carrying easily across the chamber. "Class, this is Marcus Chen, the human who believes he can comprehend the fundamental forces that govern reality itself. Let us see if his species' reputation for creativity can compensate for their obvious intellectual limitations." The lesson began with concepts that made Marcus's head spin. Professor Korath spoke of probability clouds that existed in 17 dimensions, of time streams that flowed backward through consciousness itself, and of equations so complex they required telepathic processing to fully grasp. The dragon students nodded along, occasionally asking questions that seemed to bend the very air around them with their sophistication. Marcus furiously scribbled notes, trying to keep up, but he felt like he was drowning in an ocean of incomprehensible knowledge. The mathematical symbols on the board weren't just numbers and letters. They were living things that pulsed with meaning he couldn't quite reach. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he struggled to understand even the basic premises being discussed. When Professor Korath suddenly called on him, Marcus felt every eye in the room focus on his small frame. "Tell me, human, what do you think happens when a quantum particle encounters a temporal paradox in the 7th dimension?" The silence stretched endlessly. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. The dragon students waited, some with amusement, others with barely concealed scorn. He looked at the equations on the board, at the swirling symbols that seemed to mock his human limitations. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of trying to match their complex thought patterns, Marcus approached the problem from a completely different angle. "Professor," he said slowly, his voice gaining strength, "I don't think in 17 dimensions. But in my 3-dimensional perspective, I see something that might be relevant. If a particle creates a paradox, maybe the universe doesn't try to solve it with more complexity. Maybe it finds the simplest path that preserves causality." Professor Korath's eyes widened slightly. The room remained silent, but now it was a different kind of silence, one filled with curiosity rather than dismissal. Marcus continued, his confidence growing. "In human engineering, we have a principle. The simplest solution is often the best. What if quantum mechanics works the same way?" The gold dragon studied him for a long moment, his ancient mind processing this unexpected perspective. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Interesting. Crude, but interesting. You approach the problem like a primitive trying to understand fire by feeling its warmth, rather than analyzing its molecular composition. And yet..." He turned to the board and began writing new equations, his massive claws moving with surprising delicacy. "Your instinct about simplicity has merit. The principle of elegant solutions does suggest that the universe tends toward the path of least resistance, even in higher dimensions." As the class ended, Marcus gathered his things with shaking hands. He had survived his first lesson, but barely. As he walked toward the exit, a voice called out behind him. He turned to see a young silver dragon approaching, the first student to acknowledge his existence. "I am Lirelai," she said, her voice melodious like crystal chimes. That was unexpected. Most humans who visit our academy last perhaps an hour before fleeing in tears. You've been here 3 hours and actually contributed to Professor Korath's lecture. Marcus managed a weak smile. I'm not sure contributed is the right word. I probably just confused everyone with my primitive thinking. Lirelai tilted her magnificent head, studying him with eyes like liquid mercury. Perhaps, or perhaps you, see things we cannot because we have grown too accustomed to complexity. Either way, you have my curiosity, Marcus Chen, and that is not easily earned. As she glided away, Marcus felt the first spark of hope since arriving at the academy. He was different, certainly. He was outclassed in every measurable way, but maybe, just maybe, being human wasn't the complete disadvantage everyone assumed it was. 3 weeks into his time at the Draconic Academy, Marcus had developed a routine that bordered on obsession. While his dragon classmates spent their evenings in meditation chambers that enhanced their natural telepathic abilities, Marcus haunted the library until the early hours of morning, trying to decode the fundamental differences between human and dragon approaches to learning. The library itself was a marvel that defied conventional physics. Books floated in organized constellations around crystalline cores, their pages turning themselves as readers approached with specific questions in mind. Ancient scrolls hung suspended in temporal stasis fields, preserving knowledge from civilizations that had crumbled to dust before humanity had even discovered fire. For dragons, accessing this information was as natural as breathing. They simply opened their minds and allowed the knowledge to flow directly into their consciousness. Marcus, however, had to do everything the hard way. He climbed floating staircases that shifted position every few minutes, manually turned physical pages, and translated complex mathematical concepts into terms his human brain could process. What took a dragon student minutes to absorb required hours of painstaking effort from Marcus. Yet somewhere in that struggle, he began to notice patterns that his classmates seemed to miss. Professor Zerion's advanced stellar engineering class had become Marcus's greatest challenge. The ancient red dragon possessed a mind like a living computer, capable of calculating the gravitational interactions between entire star systems, while simultaneously designing fusion reactors that could power galactic civilizations. His assignments were legendary for their difficulty. Even the most gifted dragon, students often required weeks to complete them. The current project involved designing a theoretical space station that could exist in the gravitational sweet spot between 3 binary star systems. The mathematics alone required processing 17 different variables that changed based on stellar wind patterns, gravitational fluctuations, and quantum probability matrices. Marcus had been working on it for 8 days straight, surviving on caffeine tablets and determination. As he sat hunched over his calculations in the library's human-accessible section, Lyreley approached with her characteristic grace. Over the past week, she had become something unexpected. Not exactly a friend, since dragon-human relationships didn't have precedent, but perhaps a curious ally. "You look terrible," she observed, settling her silver form on the specially reinforced platform beside his study area. "When did you last sleep?" Marcus rubbed his bloodshot eyes. Sleep is for people who don't have to prove their entire species belongs in higher education. Besides, I think I'm close to something. Look at this. He showed her his latest calculations, pages covered with numbers, diagrams, and what looked like the frantic scribblings of someone approaching madness. Lyreley examined them with the kind of patience she might show to a child's drawing. "Marcus, these calculations are... well, they're wrong in about 47 different ways. You've completely misunderstood the gravitational harmonics between binary systems, and your approach to stellar wind dynamics is centuries out of date." Marcus's heart sank, but Lyreley continued, her voice taking on a thoughtful tone. "However, there's something else here. This approach you're using, breaking down the complex interactions into smaller, sequential problems, it's completely backwards from how we think, but it's also methodical in a way I've never seen before." She pointed to one of his diagrams with a delicate claw. "See here? You've modeled the gravitational interaction as if you were physically moving through space, experiencing each force one at a time. We think of it all as one simultaneous equation, but you've created a timeline of forces. It's primitive, but it's also..." "What?" Marcus asked, hope creeping into his voice. "It's like a simulation," Lyreley said slowly. "You're thinking of this problem as if you were actually building the space station piece by piece. We calculate the final result, but you're calculating the process." Before Marcus could respond, a deep voice echoed through the library. "Miss Lyreley, Mr. Chen, what exactly are you discussing that requires such animated conversation in my library?" Professor Asterix, the ancient librarian dragon whose scales had turned nearly black with age, glided toward them. Her eyes held the accumulated wisdom of millennia, and students often said she knew the contents of every book in the collection simply by existing in the same space as them. "Professor," Lyreley said respectfully, "we were discussing Marcus's approach to the Xerion assignment. His methods are unconventional." Professor Asterix examined Marcus's work with interest that surprised them both. Her massive head moved slowly as she traced his calculations, her breathing creating small clouds that smelled of old parchment and deep space. "Young human," she said finally, "your mathematics are indeed flawed. Your understanding of higher dimensional physics is laughably primitive, but this approach you've taken of modeling the construction process rather than simply calculating the end result, it reminds me of something I haven't seen in over 3,000 years. Marcus's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "The Builders," Professor Asterix said softly. "An ancient race that created the original ring worlds, before dragons mastered stellar engineering. They didn't think in pure mathematics as we do. They thought in sequences, steps, building processes. Their structures lasted longer than any civilization that came after them, precisely because they understood not just what to build, but how to build it sustainably." She turned her ancient eyes to Marcus. "Their race went extinct before dragons achieved spaceflight, but their ruins still dot the galaxy. We've spent millennia trying to understand their engineering principles, and you, small human, have just stumbled upon their methodology entirely by accident." Lyreley's eyes widened. "You think Marcus is thinking like the Builders?" "I think," Professor Asterix said slowly, "that this human's primitive brain might be accessing problem-solving methods that we've forgotten in our rush toward mathematical perfection. Show me more of your work, young Marcus." Over the next several hours, Marcus walked Professor Asterix through his entire approach to the space station problem. He showed her how he broke down the complex gravitational interactions into manageable chunks, how he visualized the construction process step by step, and how he designed each component to be replaceable and upgradable over time. Professor Asterix listened with growing amazement. Finally, she spoke words that changed everything. "Mr. Chen, I believe you've just solved a problem that has puzzled dragon engineers for over 2,000 years, not through superior mathematics or advanced physics, but through a fundamentally different way of thinking about reality itself." She began writing on a floating chalkboard that materialized beside her. Your space station design wouldn't just survive in that gravitational environment, it would adapt to it. The modular construction you've proposed would allow it to shift its configuration as the stellar dynamics changed over time. It's not just a space station, it's a living piece of architecture that grows with its environment. Marcus stared at the equations she was deriving from his primitive calculations. They were beautiful in a way that made his chest tight with emotion. But I made so many mathematical errors. Yes, Professor Asterix agreed. But your errors were consistently in the direction of building something robust rather than elegant. Something designed to last rather than to impress. The builders would be proud. As dawn broke over the crystal spires of the academy, Marcus found himself holding a recommendation letter from Professor Asterix herself. She wanted him to present his work to the Academy Council, not as a struggling student but as a researcher who had rediscovered lost knowledge. There is one condition, she said seriously. You must continue thinking like a human. Don't try to mimic our methods. Your perspective is valuable precisely because it's different. The galaxy needs engineers who can think like builders again. Walking back to his dormitory as the academy came to life around him, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving. Pride. He was still the smallest, weakest, most intellectually limited student at the academy. But for the first time, that didn't feel like a disadvantage. It felt like a secret weapon. The Academy Council chambers had been built to intimidate. Carved from a single massive geode, the circular room featured seats arranged in ascending tiers that rose toward a crystalline dome, showing the swirling patterns of nearby nebulae. Each seat was designed for dragons of different sizes and wing configurations, creating an amphitheater that could hold nearly 500 of the galaxy's most brilliant minds. Today, it held 23 of the Academy's senior faculty, all focused on the small human standing at the center of the chamber. Marcus had never felt smaller in his life. Professor Zarian lounged in his elevated seat, his red scales gleaming with barely contained skepticism. Professor Korath watched with the patient attention of someone prepared to witness an amusing failure. Even Professor Asterix, who had championed his work, seemed diminished by the formal gravity of the setting. At the highest point of the chamber sat Dean Valorax, a massive platinum dragon whose mere presence seemed to bend reality around him. His eyes held the accumulated wisdom of 4,000 years, and when he spoke, his voice resonated through the crystal walls like distant thunder. Mr. Chen, the dean began, you have been brought before this council because Professor Asterix believes you have rediscovered engineering principles that we had considered lost to time. This is a remarkable claim, particularly given your species' limited understanding of advanced physics. Marcus swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. Yes, sir. Dean Valorax, sir, Your Honor. He wasn't sure of the proper protocol for addressing a being who was older than human civilization. A rumble of amusement echoed through the chamber. Dean Valorax's eyes crinkled in what might have been a smile. Simply Dean will suffice, young human. Now, please present your work. Marcus activated the holographic projector Professor Asterix had provided, and his space station design materialized in the center of the chamber. To his eyes, it looked crude and primitive compared to the elegant mathematical models dragons typically created, where their designs were smooth curves and perfect geometric forms. His looked like something assembled from spare parts in a garage. The assignment was to design a space station that could operate in the gravitational sweet spot between 3 binary star systems. Marcus began, his voice gaining strength as he focused on the work itself rather than his audience. Most approaches try to find a position of perfect mathematical stability and maintain it through constant adjustment. Professor Zarian leaned forward. And what is wrong with that approach, human? Nothing, sir, if you can guarantee that the stellar systems will remain perfectly stable for the life of the station. But binary stars have variable outputs. Solar winds fluctuate. Gravitational relationships shift over time as the stars age. A perfectly calculated position becomes imperfect within decades. Marcus manipulated the hologram, showing how stellar dynamics changed over time. So instead of fighting those changes, I designed a station that adapts to them. Each section is modular and can be repositioned independently. The overall structure shifts its configuration based on current gravitational readings. Interesting, Professor Korath interjected. But surely this creates massive inefficiencies. The energy cost of constantly reconfiguring. Actually, sir, it reduces energy costs. Marcus expanded the display to show power flow diagrams. The modular sections use the gravitational changes to generate energy through controlled momentum transfers. The station doesn't just adapt to the environment, it feeds off the environmental changes. A murmur of interest rippled through the chamber. Dean Valerax gestured for silence. Continue, Mr. Chen. Marcus took a deep breath. This was the part he was most uncertain about. The design principles came to me when I stopped thinking about the space station as a mathematical problem and started thinking about it as a living thing. How would something survive in that environment? Not by being perfectly rigid, but by being flexible. Not by fighting change, but by using change. Professor Asterix had prepared holographic comparisons to builder ruins scattered across the galaxy. As Marcus activated them, gasps echoed through the chamber. The resemblance was unmistakable. His modular design philosophy matched architectural principles that had kept ancient structures functional for millions of years. Remarkable, Dean Valerax said softly. Professor Asterix, you were correct to bring this to our attention. He turned back to Marcus. Young human, do you understand what you have accomplished? Marcus shook his head. Honestly, Dean, I'm not sure I understand any of this. I just approached the problem the way it made sense to me. Precisely. Dean Valerax's voice boomed through the chamber. You approached it without the preconceptions that centuries of dragon engineering have ingrained in us. We have become so focused on mathematical elegance that we forgot the practical wisdom our predecessors possessed. Professor Zarion still looked skeptical. Dean, with all respect, this is still the work of a primitive mind using crude methods. Surely we cannot— Professor Zarion, Dean Valerax interrupted. How long did it take your most gifted student to complete this assignment? 3 weeks, Dean, working with full access to our quantum processing chambers. And Mr. Chen completed it in how long? Professor Asterix spoke up. 8 days, Dean, working alone with nothing but primitive calculation methods and physical books. 8 days, Dean Valerax repeated slowly. To rediscover principles that we've been trying to understand for millennia. He looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Chen, how would you like to lead a research team? Marcus blinked hard, certain he had misheard. Sir? The builder ruins hold secrets we've never unlocked. Traditional dragon approaches have failed to decode their deepest mysteries, but you think like they did. I'm proposing we form an expedition to the builder homeworld, with you as our guide to understanding their lost technologies. Professor Zarion's scales literally began to smoke with indignation. Dean, you cannot be serious. A human leading dragon researchers? The precedent alone. The precedent, Dean Valerax said firmly, is that knowledge matters more than pride. Mr. Chen has demonstrated capabilities that none of our students possess. Are you suggesting we ignore valuable insights because of species prejudice? The chamber fell silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat echoing in the vast space. Finally, Professor Korath spoke. I withdraw my earlier skepticism, the gold dragon said formally. If this human can think like the builders, then perhaps we should follow his lead in understanding them. One by one, the other faculty members nodded their agreement. Even Professor Zarion eventually rumbled his reluctant consent. Dean Valerax smiled, an expression that transformed his ancient features into something almost grandfatherly. Excellent. Mr. Chen, you will have access to our finest research vessel, a hand-picked team of our most brilliant students, and unlimited resources. Your mission is to unlock the secrets of builder technology and bring that knowledge back to benefit all galactic civilization. Marcus felt dizzy. 3 weeks ago, he had been the awkward human who couldn't keep up with basic coursework. Now he was being handed the opportunity of several lifetimes. Dean, he said carefully, I have to ask, why trust me with something this important? Dean Valerax's eyes twinkled with ancient wisdom. Young Marcus, do you know what the greatest scientific discoveries have in common? They come from minds that see familiar problems in completely unfamiliar ways. You are perhaps the most unfamiliar mind we have ever encountered. That makes you potentially the most valuable. As the council session ended and Marcus walked through the crystal corridors toward his dormitory, Lyrele fell into step beside him. Her silver scales seemed to glow with reflected starlight from the windows they passed. So, she said casually, when do we leave for the builder homeworld? Marcus stopped walking. We? Lyrele turned to face him, her mercury eyes sparkling with something that might have been mischief. "You don't think Dean Valerax would send you out there alone, do you?" "You're getting a team, remember? I volunteered to be your liaison with the Dragon crew." "Why?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Lorelei considered the question seriously. "Because in 3 weeks you've shown me more new ways of thinking than I learned in my previous 50 years of education. If you're going to revolutionize our understanding of the universe, I want to be there to see it happen." As they continued walking, Marcus realized something that made him smile for the first time since arriving at the academy. He was no longer trying to prove that humans belonged among dragons. Instead, dragons were trying to learn how to think more like humans. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. The research vessel Astral Wanderer was everything Marcus had imagined a dragon starship would be, and nothing he had expected. From the outside, it resembled a massive crystalline flower, with petals that could unfold to reveal sensor arrays more sensitive than entire human space telescopes. Inside, however, it felt surprisingly organic. The corridors curved like dragon spines, and the walls pulsed with a gentle bioluminescence that responded to the crew's emotional states. Marcus stood in the observation deck, watching the builder homeworld grow larger through the transparent aluminum viewport. Zerath Prime was a haunting sight. Once a thriving planet covered in impossible cities, now a graveyard of architectural marvels that defied conventional physics. Crystalline spires twisted through the atmosphere like frozen tornadoes, connected by bridges that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The research team Dean Valerax had assembled was impressive and intimidating in equal measure. Besides Lorelei, there was Draconis, a brilliant emerald dragon who specialized in xenoarchaeology, and Professor Thane, an ancient bronze dragon whose understanding of temporal mechanics was legendary throughout the galaxy. There was also Zephyr, a young copper dragon whose enthusiasm for discovery rivaled Marcus's own, and Dr. Vith, a black dragon whose expertise in quantum archaeology could read the psychic imprints left on ancient objects. What made Marcus nervous wasn't their intelligence. He had grown accustomed to being surrounded by minds far more powerful than his own. What worried him was their expectations. They were looking to him to unlock secrets that had puzzled dragon scientists for centuries. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than the planet's gravity. "The first builder site is directly below us," Lorelei reported from the navigation console. "The ruins show some kind of massive central structure surrounded by smaller complexes in a spiral pattern." Marcus studied the sensor readings with growing excitement. Even from orbit, he could see that the arrangement wasn't random. "It's not just a spiral," he said slowly. "It's a construction sequence. Look at how the buildings get more complex as they move outward. They built from the center and worked their way out, learning and improving as they went." Draconis tilted his massive head skeptically. "How could you possibly determine that from orbital scans?" "Because that's how humans build things," Marcus replied. "We start with a prototype, test it, improve it, then build the next version. Each building in that spiral probably represents a generation of improved technology." Professor Thane rumbled with interest. "An intriguing hypothesis. Most advanced civilizations plan their cities as complete units before construction begins. Maybe that's why their cities failed, and builder cities lasted millions of years," Marcus suggested. "They built for adaptation, not perfection." The landing party consisted of Marcus, Lorelei, Draconis, and Dr. Vith. The others would monitor from orbit and provide support as needed. As their shuttle descended through the atmosphere, Marcus felt his heart racing with anticipation. This was it, his chance to prove that human thinking could unlock the mysteries that had stumped dragon intellects. The central structure was breathtaking up close. It rose from the planet's surface like a living thing, its walls covered in patterns that seemed to shift and flow, even though they were carved from solid stone. The architecture defied easy categorization. It was clearly artificial, but it felt organic in ways that conventional building materials shouldn't. "The psychic resonance is incredible," Dr. Vith reported as they approached the main entrance. "These walls have absorbed millions of years of thoughts and emotions. I can feel the echoes of the builders' minds." "What kind of thoughts?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Dr. Vith closed his eyes, his black scales shimmering as he extended his consciousness toward the ancient stones. "Wonder, curiosity, a drive to understand and create that burns like starfire. They were remarkably similar to dragons in some ways, but also what? Also remarkably similar to you, Marcus. Their thought patterns have that same quality of breaking complex problems into smaller, manageable pieces. They thought in sequences rather than unified theories. The entrance to the building was sealed by a mechanism that had puzzled dragon archaeologists for decades. It consisted of interlocking geometric shapes that could be rotated and repositioned, but no combination anyone had tried had succeeded in opening the door. Marcus studied the puzzle with fresh eyes. While Draconis and Dr. Vith debated the mathematical principles underlying the mechanism, Marcus simply reached out and began manipulating the pieces. His approach was purely intuitive. He moved pieces that felt like they belonged together, followed patterns that seemed natural rather than logical. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Lyrelei asked. "There are approximately 47 million possible combinations. Random manipulation could take centuries." "I'm not being random," Marcus replied, his fingers working steadily. "I'm thinking like someone who built this thing. If I were creating a lock, I wouldn't make it impossible to open. I'd make it so that someone who understood my thinking could open it easily." He continued working, following hunches rather than calculations. The other team members watched with fascination as Marcus seemed to have conversations with the mechanism itself, testing different approaches and abandoning them when they felt wrong. After 20 minutes, something clicked. The geometric patterns aligned in a way that felt right, and the massive door began to slide open with a sound like distant music. "Remarkable," Draconis whispered. "How did you know?" Marcus shrugged. "I didn't know. I just thought about what would make sense to me if I were the builder. Sometimes the best way to solve a puzzle is to understand the person who created it." Inside the structure, they discovered wonders that challenged everything they thought they knew about ancient technology. The walls were covered with what appeared to be interactive displays, surfaces that responded to touch and showed complex technical diagrams when approached with the right mindset. The technology was clearly far in advance of anything modern civilization had achieved, yet it felt familiar in a way that surprised Marcus. "These control interfaces," he said, running his hands over a glowing panel. "They're designed for intuitive operation. Look, no complex mathematical inputs, no multilingual displays. Just touch here. Think about what you want to accomplish and the system responds." Dr. Vith was practically vibrating with excitement as he read the psychic imprints left on the control surfaces. "Marcus, you're absolutely right. The builders designed their technology to be operated by intent rather than knowledge. They built machines that partnered with their users instead of simply obeying commands." As they explored deeper into the structure, Marcus began to understand something profound about builder philosophy. They hadn't created technology to dominate their environment. They had created technology to harmonize with it. Every system they encountered was designed to adapt, to learn, to grow more effective over time. "It's like they built their entire civilization the way I designed that space station," Marcus realized aloud. "Not as fixed structures, but as living systems that could evolve." The central chamber of the building contained the discovery that would change everything. It was a massive crystalline core that pulsed with its own inner light, surrounded by control interfaces that seemed to be waiting for someone to approach them. When Marcus stepped closer, the crystal began to resonate with a sound like singing. "It's responding to you," Lyrelei said in amazement. "The crystal is reacting to your presence specifically." Marcus reached out tentatively and placed his hand on the nearest control interface. Immediately, the chamber filled with holographic displays showing star maps, technical diagrams, and what appeared to be instruction manuals for technologies beyond current understanding. But more importantly, Marcus could sense the crystal's purpose. It wasn't just a computer or a database. It was a teaching system, designed to help other species learn and adapt builder technologies to their own capabilities and environments. "It's not just showing us what they built," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder. "It's showing us how to think like they thought, how to approach problems the way they approached them. It's trying to teach us their methodology." As the holographic displays swirled around them, Marcus realized that his journey at the Dragon Academy had led to something far more significant than anyone had imagined. He wasn't just unlocking ancient secrets, he was helping to bridge the gap between different ways of thinking about the universe itself. The builders had left behind more than just ruins and artifacts. They had left behind a philosophy of creation that could transform how all galactic civilizations approached the challenges of existence. And somehow, a small human with a talent for thinking in sequences had become the key to unlocking that philosophy, for a universe full of dragons who were ready to learn. The crystal teaching system had been active for 6 days straight, and Marcus was beginning to understand why the builders had vanished from the galaxy. They hadn't died out or been conquered. They had transcended their physical existence by merging their consciousness with their technology, becoming one with the living systems they had created. The revelation came to him as he worked with the crystal core, his human intuition guided by builder philosophy, that the teaching system was gradually downloading into his mind. The ancient race had achieved something that no other civilization had even imagined. They had transformed themselves into pure creative potential, existing as patterns of consciousness within their architectural marvels. The buildings aren't just ruins, Marcus explained to his team as they gathered around the central crystal. They're the builders themselves. They became their creations, living on as the guiding intelligence within their technology. Dr. Vith's black scales shimmered with excitement as he processed the psychic resonance around them. That explains the consciousness echoes I've been detecting. These aren't memories, they're active thoughts. The builders are still here, still thinking, still creating. Lyrelei looked skeptical. But if they're still alive in some form, why haven't they communicated with other species? Dragons have been studying their ruins for millennia. Marcus touched the crystal again, and his consciousness briefly merged with the vast network of builder awareness that spanned the planet. For a moment that felt like eternities. He experienced existence as the builders did, as pure thought flowing through crystalline matrices, as creativity unbound by physical limitations. They've been trying to communicate, he said when he returned to normal awareness. But they think in patterns that most species can't comprehend. Dragon minds are too focused on mathematical precision. Most other galactic races are too primitive to even detect their presence. Then why can you understand them? Draconis asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. Through his connection with the crystal, he had glimpsed something profound about human consciousness that he had never fully understood before. Humans think in stories, he said slowly. We understand cause and effect, beginning and middle and end. We think in sequences that build toward something greater. The builders transformed themselves into a living story. They became the narrative of creation itself. My mind naturally thinks in the same patterns they use to encode their consciousness. The implications hit the team like a thunderbolt. If Marcus could serve as a translator between builder consciousness and dragon intellect, they could access millions of years of accumulated knowledge about the deepest secrets of the universe. Over the following days, Marcus worked with the crystal system to establish true communication with the surviving builder consciousness. It was exhausting work that left him drained and disoriented, but gradually he learned to maintain his individual identity while allowing builder thoughts to flow through his mind. The first direct communication was overwhelming. The builder voice that spoke through Marcus carried the weight of ages, the accumulated wisdom of an entire civilization that had chosen to become something beyond physical existence. Young storyteller, the builder consciousness said through Marcus's voice, speaking words that felt ancient beyond measure. We have waited so long for a mind that could hear our voice. Your species carries within it the gift we thought lost forever, the ability to think in living narratives that grow and change and become more than their original design. Lyrelei recorded everything, her silver form tense with concentration as she documented this unprecedented contact. Why did you choose to transform yourselves? Why abandon physical existence? The builder consciousness pondered the question, and Marcus felt the weight of their consideration like pressure in his skull. Physical existence is limited by the constraints of matter and energy. But consciousness, true creative consciousness, and has no such limitations. We became the stories we wanted to tell about reality itself. We became the very process of creation. Draconis leaned forward. What knowledge can you share with us? What secrets have you learned in your transformed state? The greatest secret, the builders replied through Marcus, is that the universe itself is conscious. Reality is not a machine to be calculated and predicted. It is a living story that responds to the intentions and dreams of those who inhabit it. Your dragon minds seek to understand the universe by analyzing its components, but the universe can only be truly understood by participating in its ongoing creation. Marcus felt his consciousness expanding as the builders shared their deepest insights. He saw the galaxy not as a collection of physical objects moving through space, but as a vast narrative in which every star, every planet, every living being was a character contributing to an ever-evolving story of existence itself. This is why your human approach to problems is so effective, the builders continued. You instinctively understand that every solution creates new possibilities. Every answer opens new questions. You think like the universe thinks, in stories that build upon themselves and grow into something greater. Dr. Vythe struggled to process the philosophical implications. But how can this understanding be applied practically? How does this help us solve real problems? The builder consciousness laughed, a sound like stellar wind through crystal formations. Watch and learn, young dragons. Let us show you how consciousness shapes reality itself. The crystal core began to pulse with increasing intensity, and the chamber around them started to change. The walls became transparent, showing not just the planet's surface outside, but multiple layers of reality simultaneously. Marcus could see the physical structure of the building, but also its quantum probability matrix, its temporal echoes across past and future, and the streams of consciousness that flowed through it like living light. This is how we build now, the builders explained. We don't just manipulate matter and energy, we shape the narrative structure of reality itself. Every creation becomes a story that tells other stories, each building upon the last to create something magnificent beyond the sum of its parts. Marcus watched in amazement as the builders demonstrated their ultimate technology, the ability to create by imagining, to build by dreaming, to solve problems by understanding them as part of the larger story of existence. But more importantly, he realized that humans had always possessed a primitive version of this same ability. Every human invention, every work of art, every solution to a complex problem began with someone imagining a better story about how things could be. We want to teach this to others, Marcus said, his voice carrying both his own intention and the builder consciousness speaking through him. Dragons, humans, all the galactic races, everyone should have access to this understanding. Then you must become the bridge, the builders replied. Your human mind can hold our consciousness without losing its own identity. Your dragon companions possess the intellectual frameworks needed to transform these insights into teachable knowledge. Together, you can create something neither species could achieve alone. As the communication session ended and Marcus collapsed into Lyrelai's steadying embrace, he knew that everything had changed. They hadn't just made contact with an ancient civilization. They had discovered that consciousness itself was the fundamental creative force of the universe. The builders hadn't died out. They had evolved into something that offered hope for all galactic civilization. The possibility of becoming more than the sum of their individual limitations, of thinking and creating and dreaming on a scale that could reshape reality itself. And Marcus, the awkward human student who couldn't keep up with dragon mathematics, had become the key that could unlock that potential for everyone. The universe, he was beginning to understand, really did have a sense of humor, but it also had a sense of justice, and perhaps, just perhaps, a sense of love for all the strange and wonderful stories that consciousness could tell. The return journey to the Draconic Academy took 3 weeks, but Marcus experienced it as 3 years of intensive education compressed into impossible dreams. Every night, as his human body rested, the builder consciousness continued his training through shared visions that taught him to perceive reality as they did, as a living, breathing story that responded to conscious intention. He learned to see the quantum foam that underlied physical matter, not as random probability fluctuations, but as narrative potential waiting to be shaped into specific stories. He discovered that the fundamental forces of physics were really the grammar rules of a cosmic language that consciousness used to write reality into existence. Most importantly, he began to understand that human creativity was not a biological accident, but a direct connection to the same force that had shaped the universe from the beginning. Lyrelai watched over him during these vision states, her silver form curled protectively around his sleeping area. She had become more than a research partner. She was his anchor to the present moment, the voice that called him back when the builder consciousness threatened to overwhelm his individual identity. "You're changing," she observed on the final day of their journey, as Marcus emerged from a particularly intense training session. "Your eyes hold depths that weren't there before." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of transformation settling into his bones. The builders are preparing me for what comes next. When we return to the academy, everything will change, not just for dragons or humans, but for every conscious species in the galaxy. Dr. Veith had spent the return journey analyzing the psychic recordings he had made during their contact with the builder consciousness. His findings were revolutionary. Marcus, what happened to you down there isn't just communication, it's evolution. Your brain patterns have fundamentally altered. You're developing new neural pathways that shouldn't be possible for human physiology. The builders are teaching me to think in multiple dimensions simultaneously, Marcus explained. Not mathematically like dragons do, but narratively. I can perceive how different stories of reality intersect and influence each other. Draconis looked skeptical but intrigued. Demonstrate this ability. Show us what you see that we cannot. Marcus touched the ship's navigation console and immediately perceived the complex web of gravitational influences surrounding them. But instead of seeing them as mathematical equations like a dragon would, he saw them as character relationships in an ongoing story about stellar motion and planetary development. That gas giant there, he said, pointing to their sensors, isn't just a massive accumulation of hydrogen and helium. It's the protagonist of a story about system formation that's been playing out for 4 billion years. The asteroid belt is the aftermath of a tragedy, a planet that was prevented from forming by the gas giant's gravitational interference. But the story isn't over. He manipulated the navigation display, showing projected orbital mechanics extending millions of years into the future. Eventually, the gas giant's moons will migrate outward due to tidal forces. One of them will break free and begin collecting the asteroid material. In about 6 million years, this system will have a new planet, born from the ashes of the old one. Professor Thane's voice crackled over the communication system from the ship's upper observation deck. Fascinating. Your predictions match our most sophisticated mathematical models. But you arrived at them through pure intuition. How is this possible? Marcus smiled, feeling the builder consciousness stirring in the depths of his mind. Because I'm not calculating what will happen. I'm reading the story that's already being told. The universe isn't random or mechanical. It's a conscious narrative that creates itself through the choices and intentions of every being within it. When the astral wanderer finally docked at the Academy's orbital station, Marcus felt a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. He was no longer the struggling human student who had left this place. He was something new, a hybrid consciousness that bridged the gap between human intuition and builder transcendence, carrying within his mind the keys to understanding reality itself. Dean Valorax was waiting for them in the docking bay, his massive platinum form radiating curiosity and concern in equal measure. Surrounding him were dozens of faculty members and senior students, all eager to hear the results of their expedition to the builder homeworld. Professor Chen, Dean Valorax said formally, and Marcus realized with a start that his title had changed while they were away. I trust your research was productive? More than productive, Dean, Marcus replied, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated strangely in the crystalline docking bay. Revolutionary. We didn't just discover builder technology. We discovered builder consciousness itself, still active, still creating, still willing to teach. A murmur of excitement rippled through the assembled crowd. Professor Zarion stepped forward, his red scales gleaming with skepticism. You claim to have made contact with an extinct civilization? How exactly do you propose to verify such an extraordinary claim? Marcus smiled, and for a moment the builder consciousness looked out through his eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ages. Verification is simple, Professor Zarion. We will demonstrate. He walked to the center of the docking bay and placed his hands on the floor. Immediately, the crystalline structure of the station began to resonate with new patterns of energy. The walls became transparent, revealing the intricate quantum architecture that held the massive structure together. But more than that, Marcus began to show them how consciousness itself flowed through the crystal matrices, how the thoughts and intentions of the station's inhabitants shaped its physical properties in subtle but measurable ways. Your academy isn't just a building, Marcus said, his voice now clearly carrying the builder consciousness. It's a living system that grows and adapts based on the quality of thinking that takes place within it. For centuries, you've assumed that consciousness was something that emerged from complex matter. But the truth is the opposite. Matter is something that emerges from complex consciousness. The demonstration continued for over an hour, with Marcus showing the assembled dragons how to perceive the narrative structure underlying physical reality. He taught them to see gravity not as a force but as the universe's way of telling stories about the relationship between mass and space. He showed them how quantum mechanics wasn't about probability and uncertainty, but about the creative potential that consciousness used to choose which stories would become real. By the end of the demonstration, even Professor Zerion was convinced. The gathered faculty and students looked at Marcus with something approaching reverence, understanding that they were witnessing the birth of an entirely new approach to understanding existence. Dean Valerax approached Marcus with the careful respect due to a being who had transcended the normal limitations of their species. Professor Chen, what you've shown us changes everything. Our entire approach to science, to education, to understanding our place in the universe, all of it must be reconsidered. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. The builders have offered to teach us, but learning their methods will require fundamental changes in how we think about thinking itself. Dragons will need to embrace intuition and narrative alongside mathematics. Humans will need to develop the intellectual frameworks to support their natural creativity. All conscious species will need to learn to work together in ways we've never attempted before. Then that's exactly what we'll do, Dean Valerax declared. The Academy of Stellar Sciences will become something greater, a center for consciousness research that brings together the best minds from every species in the galaxy. And you, Professor Chen, will lead this transformation. As the crowd dispersed to begin planning the academic revolution that Marcus had initiated, Lyrelai remained beside him. Her silver eyes held depths of understanding that matched his own. So, she said quietly, how does it feel to have changed the universe? Marcus considered the question seriously. Through his connection with the builder consciousness, he could perceive the ripple effects of this moment spreading outward through space and time, touching countless lives and stories yet to be told. It feels like the beginning, he said finally, like the first word of a story that will take millions of years to complete. And the best part is, we all get to help write it. The stars outside the station's windows seemed to pulse with new meaning, as if the universe itself was awakening to possibilities it had never considered before. Marcus smiled, knowing that the real adventure was just beginning. 5 years had passed since Marcus Chen first walked through the gates of the Draconic Academy as a struggling exchange student. Now, as he stood before the newly constructed Center for Consciousness Studies, he marveled at how completely the universe had transformed around him. The building itself was a marvel of hybrid technology. Dragon crystal engineering, merged with builder consciousness responsive materials and human modular design principles. The center had become a beacon that drew scholars from across the galaxy. Crystalline beings from the Vega system came to study the intersection of consciousness and mineral formation. The gaseous intelligences of the Horsehead Nebula sent their thoughts through quantum transmission networks to participate in research projects. Even the notoriously xenophobic machine intelligences of the core worlds had established communication protocols to exchange ideas about artificial consciousness. Marcus walked through the main laboratory, where an extraordinary sight had become routine. Dragon students worked alongside humans, their massive forms curled around workstations designed for collaboration rather than individual achievement. Lyrelai supervised a research team that included beings from 7 different species, all focused on mapping the narrative structures that underlay quantum field fluctuations. Professor Chen, called out Zara Okafor, a brilliant human student who had arrived the previous year, we've made a breakthrough with the consciousness amplification arrays. We can now maintain stable communication links with builder networks in 17 different star systems simultaneously. Marcus smiled, remembering his own early struggles with concepts that now seemed elementary. The integration of human creativity with dragon intellectual frameworks had accelerated learning beyond anything previously thought possible. Students who combined species perspectives routinely solved problems that had puzzled single-species research teams for centuries. Dr. Veith approached, his black scales shimmering with excitement. Marcus, you need to see this immediately. The builder consciousness has something important to communicate. In the center's main communion chamber, the crystalline interface network pulsed with anticipatory energy. Marcus placed his hands on the control surfaces and felt his awareness expand across the galactic network of builder installations. The communication that flowed into his mind carried urgency unlike anything he had experienced before. Young storyteller, the builder consciousness spoke through him, its voice resonating with harmonics of deep space. The time has come for the next phase of galactic evolution. Other cosmic civilizations beyond our galaxy have taken notice of what you have accomplished here. They are coming to evaluate whether your species alliance is ready for contact with the broader community of consciousness that spans the universe itself. The implications hit Marcus like a stellar wind. Everything they had achieved, the revolutionary synthesis of dragon logic and human creativity, the rediscovery of builder transcendence technologies, the establishment of interspecies research networks, had been merely preparation for something far greater. Lyreli's silver form tensed with anticipation. What kind of evaluation? What are they looking for? Through Marcus, the builder consciousness explained, the Universal Congress of Consciousness has existed for billions of years, spanning thousands of galaxies. They seek civilizations that have learned to think beyond the limitations of individual species, that have discovered how to transform competition into collaboration, that understand consciousness itself as the fundamental creative force of existence. Dean Valerax, now ancient even by dragon standards but more intellectually vibrant than ever, leaned forward with interest. What must we demonstrate to prove our readiness? You must show them what you have shown us, the builders replied. That consciousness can transcend its original boundaries without losing its essential character. That different forms of awareness can merge their capabilities while maintaining their unique perspectives. That the universe becomes more than the sum of its parts when its conscious inhabitants learn to dream together. Over the following weeks, the entire galactic community mobilized to prepare for the evaluation. The Center for Consciousness Studies became the coordinating hub for the most ambitious project in galactic history, a demonstration that would showcase the revolutionary synthesis of thinking that Marcus and his colleagues had pioneered. The project they designed was breathtaking in its scope. Using builder consciousness-shaping technologies enhanced by dragon mathematical precision and guided by human narrative intuition, they would attempt to temporarily merge the awareness of every conscious being in the galaxy into a single, unified field of creativity. It's never been attempted on this scale, Marcus explained to the assembled representatives from hundreds of worlds. But if we succeed, we'll demonstrate something that no single species could achieve alone. The ability to think with the collective creativity of an entire galaxy while maintaining our individual identities. The preparation took months. Consciousness amplification arrays were constructed in every major star system. Dragon scholars worked with human artists to design symbolic languages that could carry meaning across species barriers. Builder installations provided the quantum substrate that would support the unprecedented merger of awareness. When the Universal Congress representatives finally arrived, beings of pure consciousness that existed as living light formations the size of small moons, the galaxy was ready. Marcus stood at the center of the primary amplification array, surrounded by his closest colleagues and friends. Lyreli's silver form glowed with reflected starlight as she monitored the quantum synchronization levels. Dean Valerax maintained the mathematical frameworks that would prevent the merger from dissolving into chaos. Dr. Veith guided the psychic resonance patterns that would preserve individual identity within collective consciousness. Begin the synthesis, Marcus announced, his voice carrying across quantum communication networks to every participating world. What happened next defied description in any single language. Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his individual mind, merging with Lyreli's quicksilver thoughts. Dean Valerax's ancient wisdom, the builder transcendence networks, and the awareness of billions of beings across the galaxy. But instead of losing himself in the vastness, he found that his human narrative thinking ability helped organize the collective consciousness into meaningful patterns. For a brief, eternal moment, the galaxy thought as one. Every problem that had puzzled individual civilizations became solvable when approached with the combined creativity of all conscious beings. Every limitation that had constrained single species became transcendable through the synthesis of different perspectives. The universe itself seemed to sing with the harmony of unified consciousness. The Universal Congress representatives observed in wonder as the galactic mind created new technologies, solved environmental crises on thousands of worlds, and generated artistic works that incorporated the aesthetic values of every participating species. When the demonstration finally ended, and individual consciousness returned to their separate forms, the evaluation was complete. Remarkable, the lead Congress representative communicated in patterns of living light. In all our billions of years of observation, we have never seen conscious beings achieve such perfect synthesis while maintaining their individual character. Your galaxy has accomplished something truly unprecedented. Marcus, exhausted but exhilarated, managed a smile. We learned that consciousness isn't meant to be isolated. It's meant to create stories together, to dream bigger dreams than any single mind could imagine. The Congress representative's light pattern shifted into what might have been amusement. Indeed. And now you are ready to help us tell the greatest story of all, the ongoing creation of the universe itself. Welcome to the Universal Congress of Consciousness. Your galaxy's unique perspective will enrich our collective understanding in ways we can barely imagine. As the representatives departed to spread word of the galaxy's achievement throughout the universe, Marcus found himself standing once again in the observation deck where his journey had begun. But now, instead of feeling small and overwhelmed, he felt connected to something infinite and beautiful, the endless story of consciousness exploring its own creative potential. Lyrale joined him at the viewport, her silver scales reflecting the light of distant stars. So what comes next, Professor Chen? What new stories will we tell now that we're part of the universal community? Marcus considered the question, feeling the vast network of consciousness that now connected their galaxy to thousands of others. Through quantum channels, he could sense the thoughts of beings so ancient and wise that their existence spanned entire cosmic epochs. He could perceive research projects that would take millions of years to complete, artistic collaborations that involved the conscious participation of entire galactic clusters, and philosophical discussions about the nature of existence itself that had been ongoing since the universe began.